The eastern United States once had a wild parrot of its own, and people wiped it out so completely that most Americans today do not even know it existed. Bright green birds with yellow heads and orange faces once flew over American forests in noisy flocks numbering in the hundreds. They lived in southern swamps, along rivers, and across parts of the Midwest where winter could bring frost and snow. Then they vanished. By the early 20th century, the Carolina parakeet had almost completely disappeared from the wild. The last known bird in captivity died in 1918. So what happened? Were the birds hunted out of existence by angry farmers? Did the destruction of their forests leave them nowhere to survive? Or did some unknown disease finish off the final flocks? The Carolina parakeet did not live on one tiny island or depend on one rare food source. It ate seeds, nuts, fruit, and flower buds. It sheltered in old forests, swamps, and woodland along rivers. And unlike the tropical image most people have of parrots, some populations survive far enough north to face freezing winters. They travelled and fed in large, noisy flocks. For centuries that worked, but as a lot of forests got cleared and farms spread across the landscape, the birds found a new source of food: orchards, cornfields, grain stacks. To a parakeet, it was an easy meal. To a farmer, it was theft. The birds tore into fruit for the seeds and depended on crops in groups large enough to cause real damage. Farmers began treating them as pests, and many responded in the most direct way possible. They shot them. But one part of the Carolina parakeet's behaviour made that shooting especially destructive. When gunfire brought birds down, the survivors often did not escape for good. They circled overhead, called to one another, and returned to the fallen members of the flock. That gave the shooter another chance, then another. Naturalist John James Audubon described farmers firing repeatedly into the returning birds, sometimes killing 8, 10, or even 20 with a single shot. He claimed to have seen hundreds killed within only a few hours. Their loyalty to the flock may have helped protect them from natural dangers. Against a person carrying a gun, it became a trap. One dead bird drew the others back into range. Then the next shot brought down more, and this was not something people only noticed when the species was already on the edge of extinction. Audubon was warning in the early 1830s that Carolina parakeets were disappearing from places where they had once been common. The decline had begun long before most people understood there was anything to save. Farmers were not the birds' only problem. Throughout the 19th century, enormous areas of eastern forest were cleared for timber, farms, towns, and industry. Old trees that provided shelter and nesting sites disappeared. Wild woodland was steadily replaced by a landscape designed for people. The parakeets tried to adapt by feeding around farms. That brought them even closer to the guns. They were also captured and sold as pets. Their bright feathers were used in fashion. Others were killed for sport or collected as specimens. None of these pressures had to destroy the species by itself. Together, they formed a system that kept removing birds faster than the remaining population could replace them. Forests disappeared, breeding adults were shot, flocks were trapped, birds were captured, and every surviving group became more important than the people killing it could possibly have known. That is the danger of abundance. As long as the species still exists somewhere, each local disappearance can seem unimportant. One farmer removes a flock from one field. One hunter sees more birds a few miles away. One town clears one patch of forest. Each event looks small on its own, but after decades, those small losses begin joining together. The strange part is that Carolina parakeets were not helpless animals that could survive only under perfect conditions. They ate many different foods. They could live near people, and at least some of the remaining populations still seemed capable of breeding near the end. That is why the usual explanations do not completely close the case. Habitat destruction explains the long decline. Shooting explains how entire flocks could be wiped out quickly. Capture, trade, and collecting added even more pressure. But reports suggest that some of the final populations did not simply grow weaker and smaller over many generations. They appeared to disappear suddenly. So, was something else involved? By the beginning of the 20th century, most Carolina parakeets were already gone. A wild specimen was killed in Florida in 1904. People continued reporting possible sightings after that, but none produced the clear physical evidence needed to prove the species was still surviving. Then, on the 21st of February 1918, a male Carolina parakeet named Incas died at Cincinnati Zoo. His mate, Lady Jane, had died the previous year. Incas became the last known member of his species. Strangely, he died at the same zoo where Martha, the last passenger pigeon, had died only 4 years earlier. I covered Martha and the disappearance of the passenger pigeon in a separate video, which is linked in the description and at the end of this video. But Incas could not tell scientists what had happened to the final parakeets in the wild. One theory blamed the disease carried by domestic poultry. Another suggested the parakeets were losing nesting holes to other animals. Some believed habitat destruction had simply reached a point from which the remaining population could no longer recover. The problem is that the evidence does not prove any one of those theories. No confirmed disease outbreak has been shown to have killed the final Carolina parakeets, and later research suggests the extinction may have been more complicated than one population disappearing everywhere at once. The Carolina parakeet had two recognised populations, usually described as subspecies. One lived mainly in the east, while the other ranged farther inland. Researchers have estimated that the two may have vanished decades apart. That means there may never have been one final event that killed the species. Different populations may have reached the same ending by different routes. Scientists have also examined DNA taken from a museum specimen. They did not find the strong signs of long-term inbreeding often seen in a population that has remained tiny for many generations. That supports the idea that the Carolina parakeet did not slowly disappear because it had become genetically doomed. Its extinction may have happened too quickly for those warning signs to appear. But one genome cannot reconstruct every death. It cannot completely rule out disease, and it cannot tell us exactly what happened to the final flock. What it does suggest is that this was not a species already waiting to disappear. People had pushed a widespread bird into smaller and more isolated remnants. Once that happened, different groups could have been finished off by different combinations of shooting, habitat loss, capture, competition, or disease. Before we close the file, give me your verdict. Was the Carolina parakeet mainly destroyed by farmers, by habitat loss, or by the combined pressure of everything people threw at it? And if you appreciate wildlife stories built around evidence rather than easy answers, give the video a thumbs up. The first finding is clear. Human-driven collapse? Confirmed. Shooting removed entire flocks. Forest clearing destroyed habitat. Capture and trade placed even more pressure on a population that was already shrinking. Even if disease killed some of the final birds, people had created the conditions in which one more blow could finish them. The second finding is less certain. A single final cause? Inconclusive. Disease is possible. Habitat loss may have left the final flocks too isolated to recover, and separate populations may have met different endings. No single final killer has been proved. The third finding is whether this extinction could have been prevented. It is likely. The Carolina parakeet could eat many foods, survive across a huge range, and live close to people. What it could not survive was being treated as a pest, a decoration, a pet, and a target, all while its forests were being cleared around it. America did not lose this bird because nobody saw the warning signs. Audubon was warning about its decline in the 1830s. It vanished because those warnings meant very little while the bird still appeared common somewhere else. The Carolina parakeet disappeared in scattered, shrinking flocks. But another American bird vanished on a scale that should have been impossible because it once numbered in the billions. To see how that happened, watch How Did Billions of Passenger Pigeons Vanish next.